Good morning and welcome to our Ethics in Coaching program. I'm Lori Candela and I'm the president of the ICF Connecticut chapter, which is a great privilege and honor. So I welcome all of our ICF Connecticut members as well as the members of chapters in the Northeast region. So thanks for joining us today. And I know you have a wonderful presentation ahead. Just want to share with you the outline for this morning. We have some upcoming events that I'll mention, and then I will introduce you to our speakers, and then you'll get to hear them speak. And actually created an interactive presentation that's really going to be something that we can take away a lot with regard to our ethics program. And then, of course, we'll have our Q&A at the end. So just a reminder for our chapter, as well as anyone who would like to join us for these events, on March 1st, we have a virtual coach cafe. On March 8th, we have the professional enrichment group, maintaining best practices in coaching. And I see Naomi here, who is one of the folks who runs it. On March 15th, we have another virtual coach cafe. We have them at different times so that you can join whatever fits your schedule. And then on March 31st, we have a chapter meeting. Our speaker is Laura Janusik, and she'll be talking about secret listening strategies to enhance coaches' active listening. So we invite you to join us. We invite our Northeast regional attendees to check your chapter's events and see what's on your calendar. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers so we can get started. I will start with Hope Langner. She is the Coactive Training Institute Director of Faculty. Hope, if you want to wave, if anyone can see you up there, Hello. That would be great.
It's good
Hope
to see you
all. Hope is a seasoned trainer, designer, and ICF Master Certified Coach who works with people worldwide. She is known for her heart, calm presence, and laser-sharp clarity. And Hope believes that inner alignment is the path to personal, organizational, and cultural change. She offers customized workshop and program design to business leaders and professionals who want to develop and enhance their leadership strengths and skills. Through her work as founding partner of Beauty Way Learning, Hope offers retreats and teleclasses focused on reconnecting to self, others, and the natural world in these chaotic, I can't even say the word, it's so chaotic times. Hope is the mother of 2 grown daughters, a lifelong learner, avid traveler, and aspiring gardener. And she lives with her husband and their 11-year-old puppy. I have a 13-year-old puppy. They'll always be those little ones in our hearts. And she lives in upstate New York. So welcome, Hope. And I'd also like to introduce you to Kristen Bentley, who is on the Coactive faculty. She is a gentle coach and leader with tenacity and compassionate insight. Previous to her coaching career, Kristen was a business owner, an optometrist. And when she was feeling burned out, she shifted directions. And her work now impacts people in many different industries, including healthcare, IT, retail, education, finance, pharma, athletics, and nonprofit. So we welcome you both and look forward to your presentation this morning. Jean?
Well, good morning, everyone. And I just want to say thank you to an incredible team of program directors from across the Northeast region. We have ICF New York with us today, ICF New England, ICF Toronto, ICF New Jersey, ICF Metro DC, ICF Philadelphia, and ICF Upstate New York as directors who participated in this program and made this available through their website to their chapters. And we also have others joining us from across the region, and I see across the United States, so welcome. Just quickly want to talk to you about how we're using Zoom today. If you are familiar with Zoom, you know there is a toolbar right at the bottom of the screen. We'll be using the Q&A feature for questions today. So I'll be curating the questions and making them available to Hope and Kristen as we go. The chat, if you'd like to talk to each other and put in some comments or, add some flavor, you're welcome to do that in chat, but we will be looking to the Q&A for questions today. So with that, I'd like to bring this right over to Hope and to Kristen to kick off our program.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jean and Janet and Lori, and everyone who's been involved in creating this, and welcome everyone. So glad to see you here. And I keep thinking there's so many people here. I hope that everyone can hear me, and then I don't realize I don't have to worry about that here. But it's a really interesting experience to be in front of such a large group on screens here, but really happy to be here with you and really excited to bring you this conversation and topic that we have.
Likewise. One of the things that was left out of my introduction that I just feel important to share, just to get myself present to all of you, is I'm an introvert, and any other introverts out there know that the one-on-one or small group is where I feel most comfortable. So even though this is virtual and over 200 people, there's part of me taking a big gulp in this moment to get present. So wonderful to see all of you here. And also, I don't think my location was mentioned, but the Toronto chapter is here today, and that's where I'm based out of. I'm Canadian, currently living in Costa Rica. And so it's so wonderful just to feel like I'm at home with all of you in some way.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, just for context, I live in upstate New York in the Albany area. So I'm sort of equidistant from the upstate New York chapter and the New York City chapter, but born and raised in New York. So I feel more connected to New York City. And here we are. We're going to explore ethics from a few different perspectives today with you. And we'll be using the chat. We'll be using live conversation. We'll have some opportunities to be in smaller breakouts, so you'll be able to talk with one another. So there'll be a bunch of different ways that we'll be sharing information with you and creating some learning for all of us. We imagine that you're going to leave here today with more questions than answers, and we hope that is true, because ethics is a topic where it's not always there's one straight answer. There are places where there are, but there are many places where it's really something you need to look inward and come up with the answers that really are working for you in that moment, and working for the situation. So we just want to start just with an inquiry for you to consider, and feel free to post any thoughts you have in the chat. But what's important about ethics? Why are ethics important to us as coaches? Just take a moment and put some thoughts in the chat about that. And, as you're thinking about it, just think about, other professions that have ethical standards. Like, what makes ethics an important area for professionals? I see a lot of people are talking about trust and values.
And integrity, professionalism.
Yeah.
Credibility, confidentiality.
Avoid harm. Yeah, integrity, trust, and professionalism feel like those are coming through as really strong themes.
Yeah. And the values piece, to tie this in to the ICF Code of Ethics, the purpose of the Code of Ethics is to hold the values of the ICF and the coaching profession. And that's the essence of the professionalism. And Hope had you also think of other professions. We want you to think for a moment of, we'll throw out a few different professions, but say doctors, lawyers, politicians, teachers, nurses. And just think of what your perception is of any of those professions that come to mind. Yeah, clergy is another.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, and just think about like what shapes your impression of those professions? What are some of the things that you've noticed that have you know that, you know, this is what that profession is like?
Mhm. And for food for thought, let's hear from one of you. Somebody take yourself off of mute to talk about a profession that you do feel holds professional ethics, that there is trust and integrity in your experience.
I'll speak to that. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole. I'm actually I'm a licensed psychologist as well as an executive coach, and you know, the ethics and regulations of our profession are so are just so stringent and so, you know, through graduates, through training, it almost makes you scared, to be honest with you. But it is such a foundation and a shaping mechanism for not only psychologists, but for therapists, the medical profession, in how we interact with our clients and how to keep our clients safe. So it's just a really big part of how we engage with folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And part of what I appreciate that you're pointing to, Nicole, is like from the inside on the profession, upholding those ethics, and how the profession itself holds the ethics, shapes your perception of the integrity.
Yeah. And, you know, something else that I see coming through a lot in the chat is the idea of safety, like really being able to feel safe with someone who has a professional license or professional education. And there's that, it's like, you know what you're getting when somebody is, has been deemed a professional. And then a lot of times the media will shape our impression of that profession as well. And that's also coming through here. So it's really interesting how stories or breaches or ways of people holding integrity have really shown up as important to us as we get our impressions clear about different professions, different people, because of who they are. So
yeah, and I'm noticing, and there might have been other professions mentioned here on the opposite side, where they should have ethics, but our experience is that they don't hold that integrity and trust. And there's a few people that have commented on auto mechanics. And again, I'd love to invite a person to come off of mute. And what is a profession that you feel should hold ethics, but in your experience feel like you don't have trust or they don't show integrity? And I'd just love to hear from you.
I can speak to that.
yeah.
I've recently been interfacing a lot with the medical profession, and while I find that the practitioners have been excellent and thorough and ethical and kind and thoughtful, the organizational pieces of it, the scheduling and the billing and all of that stuff that is going through in flux where I am right now has been really difficult to handle, and it's become a barrier to care, not just for me, but for the practitioners. So I don't know if there are ethical standards that govern that, but it feels like there are not. So
Yeah. And, you know, I'm seeing too, like, Terry, you mentioned that it's more certain people, it's hard to generalize, and that's absolutely so. And I notice also when things get publicized in the media or even like on a neighborhood chat board, there are impressions that people take away that actually are wider than the one incident. And that's something that really has an impact also. And I think that's partly why ICF has a whole system for managing issues that come up that are ethical issues, because it's important for the whole profession for us to be able to hold to a standard and to be able to kind of self-manage that. So that's another place for us to be looking.
Yeah. And I just want to check, Angela had her hand up. And I just want to see if there was anything pressing that you wanted to share. I don't remember your last name. I just saw.
That's okay. It's
Yeah.
Angela Jiggets. I'm a little bit under the weather, but I'm here. And the one profession that comes to mind so glaringly is our politicians.
Mm.
And do I
Yeah.
need to say any more about that?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, you're giving me goosebumps when you say that, because there are, like, what we're pointing to here and what we want you to walk away with is the how we see professions is based on how the profession itself upholds themselves. And there are concentric rings of how it impacts people. And we'll show a dive. Do we want to show that now, Hope? Or
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Yeah, you can go ahead and I'll put that up here.
Yeah.
Here's a slide. I think, can everyone, yeah, you can see that, right? We just see there are concentric circles really where ethics really impact us, starting with the center where we're, if you're the coach or you're just a human being, like at the center is you, right? And the next level of looking at ethics in this situation is looking at relationship. Like, how are you relating to other people with the way you show up? And in particular for coaches, it would be your client. How are you relating to them? Then in the bigger sense, it's like, what's the impact you have on the coaching profession or in your community when you take an ethical stand or don't? And last but not least, society. And we see also these circles also influence us from the outside. Like, there are standards in society, in our community, in the way we engage with people in relationship that all impact how we relate to them as well.
Yeah. And part of, Angela, your point of need I say more just shows the impact of, if the ethical standards are not held, and the extent to how they're not held, it impacts more and more people in society.
Yeah. So let me take that off here. And Marie, you also pointed to a lot of change in some of the places where we thought the professions were ethical, and now we're seeing a lot of apologies coming around systemic racism and discrimination. And you're right, people are starting to be much more critical of bias. And we see that there's a connection between ethics and bias. And that's something we'll touch on in some different ways as we go through the rest of our conversation today.
Well, actually, that's a great segue. Why don't we go there now, Hope? Because what we want to share with you are some definitions and distinctions. So I'll pop up a slide here.
Yeah, and the distinctions we want to draw are between concepts like morals, values, and ethics, because there's some ways that we hold them in an overlapping way, but we really see them as different. So, as you look at the slide, morals we see are more held in our culture or our community or religion. It's a sense of what's right and what's wrong. What is behavior that we're okay with, what's behavior we're not okay with. And of course, that's going to vary in different cultures, in different communities. And it's often unwritten here.
And
values,
sometimes,
go ahead.
sorry,
Yeah.
I just want to add to that. Sometimes when things are unwritten too, we may not even know that we are holding these morals. This is a place where we can have unconscious biases, because it's the way we've been brought up, the way that we think, and we can delineate, a right or wrong based on that.
Absolutely. And then values can also relate to how we're raised, and can also touch on things that we're not aware of, but they're more individual and personal to us. When we honor our values, that's often a sense where we have an emotional response to that, where there's something like you can feel it in your whole being that something feels right or something feels off to you. That's pointing to a value that's being honored or not honored. And so if people have talked about politicians, and there's been a lot in the news about politicians not being truthful. And for some of us, that really steps on a value about integrity or honesty. And there's going to be an emotional reaction to that. And it can also spill over into ethics, because then we get to like, what are some of the principles of conduct that are okay and not okay? But ethics can be chosen. How we honor ethical guidelines is something we can choose to honor or not honor. And there are times people get tempted by things and they know, like, there's some feeling like this may not be the right thing to do, but I feel really tempted. On the other hand, there are ways that we know, like, ethics can be a guide to us to making good decisions. So it's complicated. Yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
It's complicated and nuanced, and we hope that you're seeing where these can overlap. And what we want to invite you into is curiosity around where the overlap may occur. We make an assumption, we're sitting in front of a group of coaches. We make an assumption that you know what values are, and you work with your clients to honor their own values and not impose your values as a coach. But this is where things can get slippery, and where we really want you to separate morals and values from ethics. And so we're going to walk you through, some more ways of thinking in order to pull those pieces apart too.
Yeah. So, yeah. And Cassandra, I saw your note, like, ethics can be chosen. The power of choice is huge here. And how we hold ourselves as people is a really important part of that. So some, excuse me, some of the other places we want to point you're looking are things like ethical issues include pieces like conflict of interest, like having multiple roles in a situation, like professional integrity. So all of those, impact us as coaches and impact our profession as of coaching.
I'm curious. I would love to go to the group once again, and based on your experience, whether you're new to coaching or very experienced, let's have you put in the chat some examples of where there has been conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest or dual roles.
Yeah. And, just to fill in a little about that, when we're thinking about conflict of interest, it's really, what are some situations where it's been hard for you to be objective? Like coaching a family member, that's an example, or business consulting.
Yeah, or coaching a coworker, someone you have a previous relationship.
Or coaching different people in relationship with one another. Profit sharing.
Yeah. Coaching both the leader and their boss. Yes, two sisters, two people in relationship of any sort.
Yeah, selling beauty products to your clients. Yeah, so like selling anything really to your clients could be a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone with strongly opposing political views. Interesting. So it's, how do you stay objective in that? It's a great place to look.
Yeah, and that's the place where separating morals, values, views, and ethics becomes important.
Yeah. Yeah. Succession planning is another one. Being the board chair and the director of an organization. Yeah, you could see there's a challenge there, or, coaching both of them. Because you start to know stuff that you can't share with the other person, and that can get really messy as well.
Yeah. And when there's a sponsor in the coaching relationship, right? When one party is paying and you're coaching somebody else directly, and there may be mixed goals or expectations in the coaching. Yeah.
Yeah. And Jim, an interesting one, being a vegan coach and coaching an animal livestock farming executive. And, that really is a great example of, like, how do you hold your personal way of living, your personal way of being separate from what your client needs in that moment? How do you work with them in a way that actually doesn't bring your perspective into their world? And at the same time, that's probably partly why they hired you. So it's a really great place to look to, so one, another piece to consider is what and how do you disclose different things that may come up that have an impact on the relationship or have an impact on how you hold it.
Yeah. Or if you can't be impartial and support someone, what action do you take then? These are all the nuanced areas. Yeah. Okay, great examples.
Yeah. So yes, now we're going to shift gears a little bit and look at, now that we've just laid out a little bit of some definitions, and we could obviously talk about all of that a lot longer. We want to just start looking at how do you know when something needs to be addressed from an ethical perspective? Like, how do you know when you're approaching something that could be an ethical issue?
What are your yellow, orange, or red flags? That's
Yeah.
another way to put that.
Yeah.
And again, feel free to put in the chat, or if anyone wants to come off of mute for this one and share. What are the signs for you?
What keeps you up at night? Yeah. Gut feeling. It doesn't feel right. Like, how do you experience that? Like, where do you know? Is it in your body? Is it in your thinking?
Can I share one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jesse. I'm outside of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. And this happened to me just the other week where I was hired by a company to help coach the group, to coach the team, to work more effectively together. And there was one person in particular who was struggling, and the boss said, go coach that person to be more effective. And I viewed that as a challenge because I knew exactly where this person was struggling. I felt like I could help. And then I got into the one-on-one session, and what I thought was going to be meaningful and rewarding opportunity to help, I quickly felt all of this frustration rising up inside of me. And I just wanted to mentor. I wanted to consult. I wanted to advise. And because I had my own thoughts, and I thought I could keep a coaching stance. I thought I could hold my coaching mindset, but I misjudged my own abilities to approach that situation. And we concluded the session. I broke stance, and I just say, hey, would it help if I offered you some tips? He said, sure. And I gave him some tips, and I said, you know what, that's about the best that I'm going to be able to do. But man, did I just learn something about myself.
Wow.
Wow. And thank you for sharing your learning with all of us. You're getting a lot of gratitude from your peers.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, because what I'm hearing particularly in there, Jesse, in addition to what people are sharing in the chat, that it's spidey senses, it's intuition, it's, somatic, what you noticed is you were aware that you were stepping out of your coach role and going into consulting or some other, you were stepping out of being a coach. And it is our responsibility to recognize that.
Yeah. And then to name it.
Yeah.
If it's having an impact. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else? Anyone else have an example you want to share, or an experience that you can offer?
But just on that topic of consulting and coaching, because I've seen a lot of comments about the distinction there. We're just, Jesse, you were referring to a bit, felt like a mentor. I'd be really curious how many coaches here do fairly often, or do they really resist giving their suggestions if they ask, if they think a client could benefit from their counsel, we could call it consulting, but it's just talking about what strikes the coach as maybe beneficial thoughts for the client. I mean, I don't know where coaching versus consulting starts, but I've heard many coaches will be willing to offer their opinions if they think the client will be helped by those. Are we saying we're drawing a line there? Where do we draw the line?
Yeah. I think, there's a lot of conversation in the chat about this too, where Joan said there's nothing wrong with stepping out of that role as long as you tell the client that's what you're doing if the situation calls for it. And I would add to that it's also helpful to ask the client if it's okay with them for you to share something that might be useful, and then ask them how was that for you? Is that helpful or not helpful? Just, it's good information for you as a coach, because sometimes it's so easy to think, oh, I've had that experience, I could be helpful, but actually it's not the same for them and it's not always helpful. So being able to name that and be in conversation about the value of it is one way to take yourself, sort of name that you're not coaching in that moment, and also get the point across. Another thing that might be helpful is just to ask yourself, who am I serving if I offer this? Is it for my benefit or for my client? So that's another way that you can have like a guideline that begins to help discern here.
I think,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think sometimes it can be very jarring in the moment to say, okay, now I'm taking off my coaching hat and I'm putting on my consulting hat. Of course, we always, ask and without attachment. So I just put it in my coaching agreement, the difference between coaching and consulting, and that sometimes I will function as a coach and sometimes I will function as a consultant. I do ADHD coaching, so of course we have to do some education and strategies and things, but always but then may I suggest something that might be helpful to you? Let me know if it doesn't land for you. But I just think it's very jarring to say, okay, now I'm stopping being a coach. Now I'm starting being a consultant. So I try to just get it up front in the coaching agreement so that we can smoothly transition if in the moment.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for that. That was Naomi, right? I think who was just speaking.
No, that was Linda King.
Linda, thank you.
Yeah.
And Margaret Whitten, you asked, you were posing a question to the group, how many step into advice. The question that came for me is, I'm curious how many of you have dual roles, because I think many coaches, just like Linda shared, are coach consultants or coach mentors or coach trainers or coach with another business. And again, this is the place where we're going to have you walk away with more questions, and we hope we're opening your awareness to some things you may not be seeing, because when we're purely honoring the coaching profession, we are honoring that our client has the answers and we are supporting them to find their insights. And so this is where we want to look at, in order to hold the integrity of the coaching profession versus consulting versus mentoring, it's like, how do you in any given situation want to hold that line? What are the questions you want to ask yourself to make sure that you are having the impact you want to have on your client, those around them, community, society?
So I'd like to jump in, Hope and Kristen. One of the questions top of mind, which is really connecting to this thread of conversation, is when does sharing your thoughts become unethical?
It's a great question. I would say, again, a place to look is, who are you serving when you're sharing your thoughts? Are you doing this for your own sense of they really need to hear this, or is it something that would really make a difference in the coaching? And I think Ariana had a comment here too, to just start by asking the client, like, how would this help you? If the client's asking for advice, like, what are they really wanting? Turn the question back toward them.
And we would love to give you a clear line of right or wrong, but it's not something we can give you, because every situation is going to be different. But what we can give you as we move on in this call is some guidelines and some new things to consider that you may not have considered.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And Terry Belf has her hand up, and then.
Thank you. This is a great question, and I learned a lot from Michael Marks as I was exploring ethics, and I put the article that ICF put in their blog in there. And what I learned was that when we give advice, the brain, this is a neurophysical response that I haven't seen yet. When we give advice, the front part of the brain offloads and is in a different configuration. And when it is, you're working with only a part of the person, a part of that brain. And we are supposed to work with the whole person. And what happens when you only work with part of it is that the person doesn't own it, that you know without knowing the brain physiology. The person doesn't own it in the same way as it's theirs.
Yes.
So what I do is if someone asks me for advice, and it's more than just a quick question, would you go to the hairdresser tomorrow? You know, it's not that kind of thing. But if someone asks for advice or consulting, I say, yes, I can help you with that. And I would love to, not during our coaching engagement. Now I have a defined coaching engagement. I don't go for years. I go for 6 months at most. And then we will set up a separate contract, and I'll be happy to get into that. And I ask your permission to evaluate the 2 different processes for me, for my learning, after both are done. And I have found that to be very useful because I learn a lot and they get what they want. And the public is not confused. Oh, my coach told me to do this, or this is the advice I got from my coach. We don't want the public to hear that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And, you know, Terry, you're pointing to something that I hold as a really important distinction, which is giving advice as opposed to sharing maybe an example of something that might be beneficial, sharing like a part of myself as coach, where sometimes I could offer that to the client because there might be something helpful, not from how I handled it, but from the sort of the metaphor of what's in there. Whereas giving advice, like, I think you should do X, is a completely different piece. And to me, that feels more like consulting and would really need to be clear. But that, you know, again, that's my personal view of it. And it may be different for many of you.
Yeah, it feels like it's a great time to move to, okay, once you've had these red flags or yellow or orange, something has been alerted in you, or you're noticing, wow, I've got some dual roles here. How do I handle this? This feels like it could cross an ethical dilemma. What we're going to do is just give you some questions to consider, and then also that through the lens of that diagram, and we can bring that back up. I'll just pop up the slide of these guidelines. Whoops. There we go. So a place to look is even like the questions we're already sitting in. Who and what do I need to consider? Okay, and from those concentric circles, and again, we'll bring this back up in a moment, but from the coach moving out, like even who and what do I need to consider for myself?
Yeah.
And then moving out to the client and those that the client is in relationship with. And Hope, it felt like you were coming in. So
I was just going to say, yeah, it's just like thinking about the whole situation and who might be affected by what needs to happen now. What's the impact if I take a stand or if I make a comment or point something out that I think the client needs to pay attention to? What's the impact that will have?
Yeah. And it might be the impact on the client, those around them, the organization, the community, and society too.
Yeah. And the profession, you know, that's another place to look, because as coaches, we're representing the profession every time we do something in our professional role. Yeah. So that's one question. And the other is really looking at if I take an action or if I act or do not act, if I do something or choose not to, which is also doing something, like choosing not to act is acting in a different way. What's the effect that's going to have on the people that that will be affected by this?
So we'll share these slides with you after too, so you can take these questions away.
Yeah. And so, you know, what we really think is important here is really giving considered thought to any ethical question that you are aware of, to really take the time you need and the space you need to look at what is the impact that this will have? You won't always know everything, but it will give you a sense of what might happen. And that will help you sort out how you want to go forward.
Hope, do you want to bring the diagram back up just so they
Yeah.
can see it again before?
Yeah,
We
I
are
can
going
do
to,
that.
in a moment, we're going to give you a case study or an example and send you into some breakout rooms just to have conversation with your colleagues. But just as a reminder for those that are visual learners, these are the concentric rings. And really you can, you can create your own rings, but this is just an invitation to look in these different dimensions as a place to see who and what might be impacted.
Yeah. Okay. So shall we go to the first scenario, Kristen?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
before we do, I want to bring up something that was brought up earlier that is, as of, I believe it was 2 or 3 years ago, and somebody from the ICF may be able to verify the timing, but the ICF Code of Ethics, the ACTO, Association of Coach Training Organizations, Code of Ethics were updated in order to include and be sensitive to cultural awareness and social identity. And so again, I'm just going to share my screen just to share 2 pieces that are right out of the most recent version of the Code of Ethics.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is another layer when we're looking at who and what might be impacted and bringing in what we talked about earlier related to morals, values, unconscious biases that we might be sitting in based on our lived experience and our social identity. The ICF has really taken responsibility and integrity around holding us all in integrity, around being sensitive to clients' identity, environment, experience, values, and beliefs. And then also to be aware of and actively manage any power status difference that may show up between the client and you as coach that may be caused by cultural, relational, psychological, contextual issues. So looking at the systems of oppression that could be at play and showing up in the relationship dynamic.
Hey, anything anyone wants to say about that? Just taking that in. Any comments here before we move into the next part? Yeah, I see Monica.
Yeah,
go ahead.
hi. Yeah, that last one really speaks to all of the spidey senses that people were talking about, what the powers, issues.
Yeah.
When you know something that your client doesn't know because you have the CEO's information, or when you're coaching a boss and a subordinate. And I just was really glad when those were added, that they really do help point a few more things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what we want you to step away from this with is to be courageous, that when your spidey senses are going off related to that, whatever the context is, whether it's social identity, organizational rank and privilege, any form of power or difference that could be coming into play that could impact the coaching, we want you to courageously do this exploration. What could be the ethical dilemmas or considerations to have? And then what is the action that, or not action, that you're going to take from that, the conversations that you might open up from there. Okay. All right.
Okay, so what we want to do now is give you a chance to consider a scenario, and we'll have you, we'll share the scenario with you, and then we'll ask you to join a small group and have a conversation about it. So this is the scenario we want to share with you to start with. And I will read it just for everyone's benefit.
And
Terry,
Hope, just before you started, if you don't mind, I'm just going to set them up. So imagine that you are the coach in this scenario. So be yourself, present time, with your own social identity. So you don't need to pretend that you're somebody else. It's not really a role play that way. Right. You as coach, and that now Hope will read the scenario.
Okay, so Terry.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, whoops.
There.
Terry sought coaching because they are at a crossroads in life and in work. They've committed 20 years to the company where they're currently working, and they have the opportunity now to apply for a new role, a dream job for them that would give them a new team, more responsibility, and they get to travel to Europe, Asia, and the Middle East from North America. Terry identifies as an Asian American trans woman, goes by they, them pronouns, is the first in their family, born in North America, and the first to go to university, has multiple business degrees, including an MBA, as well as a fine arts degree. And you know Terry personally, you used to work for the same company. You've seen and you've experienced some of the internal challenges and dynamics in the company. And Terry shared a few things with you confidentially. Terry said, you know, I've been really working toward this role forever. And one major barrier is if I get this role, I'll be reporting to Brighton. And you know, with their religious beliefs and what they think about me and the run-ins we've had before, you know that I have this other secret lifelong dream of leaving the corporate world to sell my art and teach art, but I have a family to support. I know you've done this in your life. You've made this happen. That's why I need you to coach me. I don't know what to do. And to top it off with the stress from COVID over the last few years, I'm wondering if I need to go back on my medicine for anxiety. So that's the scenario. That's the ask from Terry to you. And as Kristen said, we want you to assume that you're the coach in this scenario. So be yourself and just think about, like, how might your own identity, your own unconscious and conscious biases, morals, values, and worldviews play into how you hold the ethical questions here. And notice, what are the ethical considerations that are flagged for you, and what else might be here that you're not noticing? So that's what we want you to consider as we send you into small groups. And you'll be in these small groups for 10 minutes, and you'll have a couple of minutes to watch. Well, at 10 minutes, we'll let you know that we'll be closing the rooms in 2 minutes. So you'll have 12 minutes total. And we'll just have you discuss with your colleagues in the small group what you would do with this scenario. So we'll see you back here in about 12 minutes. And the slide up again, I think we'll be able to put them into the slide into the breakout room. Is that right?
Yes.
Right, we should be able to send them right in, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so we'll do that.
Yeah. And so
we could also take a screenshot, Hope.
We could do that as well.
Yep, here,
yeah.
I'll put it back up. Also, as you go into the room, remember in the conversation, there's no right or wrong. What you're going to have is 4 or 5 different people coming to this to have a discussion with different perspectives. And this is why it's a giant think tank, just to see what gets flagged. What are you seeing?
Yeah.
What is somebody else seeing? And
let me know when you want to open the rooms.
Yeah, this is a good time to do that.
Okay. Everybody should be getting their opening rooms right now.
Yeah, and we'll send a slide over to your rooms as well, so you'll have that.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. This is Jean again, popping in to just address a few of the questions that came in through the chat. You will be receiving CCEUs for this session, and yes, they will count toward your ethics credit. The CCU forms come directly from the chapter with which you registered. And if there are any questions, feel free to contact us here at ICF Connecticut, and we will reach out to the program directors and help facilitate that. We also wanted to let people know that there's a translator and caption feature, that there's an active live transcript happening, so people can refer to that if they prefer to read rather than listen. Issues with that, we wanted to be inclusive with that. And we also wanted to offer an opening code for those chapters who use those for accumulating CCU requests. That opening code is ENGAGE. ENGAGE, E-N-G-A-G-E. Thanks, everybody, and back over to Hope and Kristen.
thank you. Well, we are seeing so many comments about great conversation in our room. So we would love to hear from some of you. What made that conversation great with your peers in this relationship to this topic of ethics?
Good morning. My name is Sarah Scala. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And in my group, we talked about a couple of things. The importance of addressing the feeling that is coming up in the scenario that you have shared. It's important to say, hey, I'm noticing you're feeling XYZ, to acknowledge it. And also, I shared a couple of things that have been working well for me. In a situation where the client is trying to work through a decision, A or B, or a choice. Lately, I've been asking clients to draft or write a non-negotiables list and or a pros and cons list. And maybe they do it live with me. Often I send that as their homework assignment, as sort of, again, depending on the sense of urgency. But I think what made our coach group so effective, our breakout, was just people were really open to sharing and giving ways that they might support that client. So thanks.
Okay. Great. And Sarah, if you can stay just a little bit longer, I'd love to hear from an ethic. Those are great tips on how to support. And what were some of the flags around the ethical concerns that came up?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So I talked about how when clients talk about medicine, therapy, prescriptions, things like that, I'm very clear with the client that I'm not able to advise or discuss medicine because I'm not a doctor. And I advise them to go back. Why don't you have a conversation with your therapist or your psychiatrist or your primary care physician? A member in my breakout group said that she often tells the client, you have a team, it looks like. You have, your therapist, your primary doctor, and I'm your coach. Let's go back to those who have prescribed, whatever medicines that you have questions about, and I'd love for you to reach out to them. So that's how we talked about that, the medicine as an ethics possible, watching that ethical line that I don't believe I'm allowed to cross because I'm not a therapist and I'm not a doctor. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah. Linda, I see your hand up also.
Yeah, so we took a little bit of time to figure out what a personal relationship is with a coworker.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we came to, and please, other group members said were wonderful. If I misrepresent, but we were uncomfortable with the idea of coaching somebody with whom we had a personal relationship. So we agreed that we could talk to them as a friend.
Yeah.
And if they wanted coaching, that we would reach out to other colleagues to find a good match, but that we would be uncomfortable with starting a coaching relationship with somebody that we knew personally.
Great. What I'm hearing in that is one of the warning flags was, what does personal relationship even mean? And depending on what that means, then the action is going to be taken. So what I'm hearing you say is, if it felt too personal, too close, friendship, then refer them to somebody else.
Yeah, I was out. The point is, if you just know somebody as a coworker and you don't really know anything about them personally, that's very different than having gone out, knowing more about them in a less business sense and more personal sense.
Yeah, great. Brenda, you have your hand up. And
yeah, we had a great group in our conversation. But what I will share is what came to my mind when I read that, or read the case as a coach. So this person is a trans. This person is Asian American, and this person is wanting to have this job. So we're talking about issues that our society is having problems accepting. We're talking about how does this person feel being first generation Asian American, being trans, wanting to have a job, knowing that all these things that he has really are triggers for other people. So my thing was, as a coach, what are my triggers? How do I feel about trans? And I shared that I had to take a training course, equity, diversity, and inclusion course, because I knew I had some issues there. So I had to own my own biases and then start going forward.
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that in, Brenda. And that is an important piece that we put in this as a way of looking, right? We do have to look at what is the identity difference, what is the societal impact, the systems of oppression that are at play, and what do we make up about that as coach? And what, how are we coming into this scenario and really being humble and curious about it and responsible around that.
That's great. Yeah. And I just want to underline that, Kristen, you used the word humble. And I think that that's such a powerful place to look, to just come from a culturally humble place, or, a humble place of not knowing, and be willing to be curious and be willing to get things more clear as needed.
Can I just say one other thing? I want to give a shout out to Toronto ICF, because we had a committee for over a year as we decided how we were going to create our inclusion diversity statements. So we met and we talked about all those things, that messy subjects that no one wants to talk about. And that's really what led me to the course.
Well, wonderful.
That's great. Yeah.
Thank you. And Minal, or I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, so please let me know.
Minal.
Okay.
Okay.
Brenda, you're going to be my new favorite person. I talk about identity a lot. So actually, I'm going to talk about it from a different perspective. The person that we are reading about is Asian. They are, in the queer community. I am Asian. My parents are from India. And I am bisexual. So I very much identify with that community. I'm in my late 40s. There's a lot of commonalities. I could easily make assumptions based on what I know. And I've had, coaching clients that are also Asian. And I know we have shared identity, but I always bring it back to, yes, we have this in common, and I validate that, but I cannot make assumptions about where they're at. And so that's so important. Just being a person of color does not mean you understand. Just being part of the gay community does not mean you understand. It's all about their experience.
Yeah, thank you so much for that perspective, because again, that's where ethics can get blurry, right? We can assume a shared experience based on identity, and everyone is individual. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. There was a hand that was up and went down. We can hear from, it was a gentleman, I believe, who raised his electronic hand.
Anybody else? Yeah. Monica, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I wrote about it in the chat box, but I thought it was really important to clarify what the issue is that this potential client needs help with. And obviously, if I feel too close, because we don't know exactly from the scenario, then our group really felt that we should step back and just be more of a friend and maybe help them find a coach. But, just get that clarity. There are a lot of issues all swirled in here. And if you as a coach feel comfortable handling those issues, I've had clients who are on meds and have had therapy. I've had clients who have a big conflict with their boss. So it depends on the comfort level of the client, as well as a real clear agreement of what you are being expected to, what role you're going to play with that client.
Yes.
And if they can keep that really separate, I think Jill said in my group, if I didn't coach anybody I knew, could live, right? Just because I know them. It's a past coworker, it's not a current coworker.
Yeah. And I think, Monica, you're pointing to something really important, the clarity of what is here right now, what is the relationship we're in this moment. And sometimes it could happen when you're in a coaching relationship too, and something shifts, to keep naming that. And, if you need to recontract with your client, or, come up with a change to the initial agreement you had, that's what's needed then. So I think I'm a big proponent of naming what is here now as a way to get really clear with people.
Yeah. And I just also want to honor Monica. Thank you for your perspective. I agree with that. And I've been coaching for 12 years. And I also, one of the things that I actually loved about Hope inviting me to come and talk about this topic is to actually re-immerse myself in it. Because we can go into autopilot with experience and feel like, oh, I'm comfortable with so much. And then when we actually pause and look, it's like, and we peel back the layers. Are we really comfortable? Are we missing something? What is the awareness that I'm not aware of because of experience? And so I just want to offer that as a both and for others that are in your situation.
That's so good. Betsy, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. You know what, I really want to say that I appreciate the scenario that you gave. I think it was so complex because it dealt with potentially psychotherapy issues, cultural issues, general, seriousness of or complexity of job possibilities, that it really focuses on, are you going to let the client be resourceful? And not assumption. Are you going to really keep your hat on? And my training also is as a psychologist. And when the issue of being on meds came up, what occurred to me is that I really believe that a person is capable of deciding whether they need to see somebody to discuss it, if they really haven't seen somebody. And the whole discussion prior about really whether you advise or not advise, and coaching is not about advising, so that if you're going to do something else, you're taking on a different hat. And I think that the scenario really did point us in that direction. And so I appreciated it. And I think members of my group felt very similarly about it.
Thank you, Betsy. And I feel like I want to lock in what you said for everyone as a filter, as a flag. Are you going to let the client be resourceful? Right? Because if we aren't, that is an ethical concern right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah.
Okay, Margaret.
All right, just real quickly, and I thought it was a great scenario as well. We enjoyed discussing many aspects of it, but one thing about being the friend and whether you could coach somebody and coach a friend. And I think earlier a comment was made by one of the groups that this would be a barrier for coaching. And in our group, we discussed that a bit and felt quite differently about that. So quite differently about that. So I just thought I'd put that out there.
I'd love to hear a little more about how did you feel about it? What was the difference?
Well, the difference was, I think most of us have experienced coaching friends at different maybe levels of friendship, but one person was saying, hey, I approach coaching engagements very analytically. So whether they're a friend or not, I'm going to be asking very similar questions of them to help them through whatever it is they need some assistance with. And I didn't say this, but my own personal experience, I've coached some friends, and I find it fairly easy. They have to understand, of course, the relationship is different because I am their friend, but I have found it fairly comfortable to engage with them as a coach, make them resourceful, ask them the good questions, listen. It's a very different relationship. So, yeah, I mean, it's not that I do that a lot, but I have done it. And I think the people have found it very helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And, I think hearing what you're saying, it really underlines for me how individual this kind of a decision could be. Because I know I've coached friends, and one of the things I found is sometimes the coaching relationship actually went to a deeper level of intimacy than the friendship. And I started to find if I was going to coach a friend, that was something I needed to disclose up front, because for some people that was not, like, they didn't want to run into me in the supermarket again, because there was more, we'd gone into some really deep places. So it's a really interesting, it changes the relationship, I guess, is the bottom line. And then to be really clear about, are you willing to do that, and which relationship is more important? If it comes down to that, is another place to look. So thank you for that.
Hope, I just want to check like a transparent design with you. We have 3 more hands on this case scenario. We have another case scenario that we can throw you in to have further conversation with. And so Hope, do we want to do that, or do we want to give it as homework for them? And
I think
address the
it
3
would be
hands?
good to, I think we could do the other scenario, but maybe just take 2 more, there are 3 people up with hands up. So if we could do this bottom line, do you think we have enough time? Yeah.
So in like a short summary, we'll hear from each of you, and then we'll go into the case, the other case scenario. So Mary.
So one of the things that made this scenario complex was the fact that now this was a trans person who was going to be working in the Middle East and Asia, and a woman, no less. And so to me, this looked more like an HR scenario than a coaching scenario. And I came out of big industry, and one of the premises was that you could not send women to those countries because they would not receive you. And that came through in spades. You know, I have a number of examples which I discussed in the breakout group, but I think that's something that has to be addressed somehow, whether it's directly to the client or suggesting that the client might want to review that with her manager or whatever. But in my experience, what happens is that if the woman is in that product, she has to send the man or to Saudi Arabia with a business card that says vice president, because they will not receive women. And I had the head of Samsung hang up on me when I called once for something. So they don't want to deal with women.
Thanks for raising that.
Yeah, and that's that is a piece that you caught in the complexity of this, is the global, it's not just, you know, it's those concentric circles of what is at play in any given scenario. And then what happens to you as coach, and what are the ethical concerns and dilemmas to consider? So thank you. Yeah. Persephone.
I don't remember who had mentioned it, but I appreciate the idea of being allowed, able, and encouraged to constantly revisit the relationship within the session. Example, if you decide to coach this person and then you find that it's going, you know, that you're suddenly having too much bias, or that you can't separate things, or whatever the case may be, like being okay with revisiting that and saying, you know, I'm getting really overwhelmed here, or whatever the case may be. And I greatly appreciate that level of honesty and openness, that it's not like, oh, I made my decision, so now I have to just suck it up.
Right.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
for that
thank
perspective.
you.
Yeah.
And Marcia, that'll be our last question before the next breakout.
Hi, it's not really a question as much as a comment. And when Margaret was talking, it reminded me that it took me back to the very beginning when you all were asking about other professions that have a code of ethics. And one of the tenets of being a profession, of course, is to have a code of ethics. And in a lot of organizations where you have this code of ethics and the professionals are facing an ethical dilemma, there is actually a place that you can take this. And I think that, as Margaret was talking, I'm thinking, so as a coach, why would I feel that I have to solve this by myself? Is there a group of peers that I could take this to help me kind of deconstruct or to navigate? I mean, I have a supervisor, and that's one of the things that I use with my supervisors when I'm thinking that there's an ethical dilemma. So I think that that's something that it made me think about is, okay, so why do I think that I need to solve this by myself? And who can I go to actually help me to address, because it's a dilemma. It's not a legal thing. It's something that you can go one way or the other.
Absolutely, yes.
That's also what we want you to walk away from with us. And that's part of why we're sending you into breakout rooms to see the value of talking to somebody else, to your peers. And there are resources at the ICF. I have called the ICF International with ethical concerns, asking for advice, and they're a wonderful resource, in addition to the resource page on ethics. So thank you, Marcia.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so we're going to shift gears a little and offer you another scenario to work with, and we'll be sending you again into breakout rooms to talk about it. And Kristen, can you put the slide up for this one?
Yes.
And yeah. And you know, I think the easiest would be if you want to take a screenshot of this while it's up. That's probably the best thing, because we couldn't quite get the slide into the chat rooms earlier.
And we apologize for that.
Yeah. So I'll just read this through for people who need to hear it, and then we'll send you off. So you and your client, and again, you are the coach, you as you are as a human being in all your identities now. And here's the scenario. You and your client, Maria, have created clear agreements around your coaching. You've established a great relationship. And prior to an upcoming coaching session, Maria leaves you this voicemail. Thanks for helping me get clear about how to grow myself as a leader. I'm looking forward to our call later this week. I want to give you advance notice so you can let me know what you need. I talked to my leader at work about you, and we want to bring you on board to coach several people on my sales team. With all of the changes in our company, performance goals aren't being met. I'll give you the background on each of them, and we have an attractive fee structure for you if these people get their sales numbers up. Also, we'd like you to sit on a committee that makes recommendations for leadership development based on what you learned from coaching so many sales leaders in the company. We'll meet regularly to evaluate the success of your coaching within the company. And of course, I still want you to be my coach. Looking forward to bringing you on board because you've made a big difference for me. So that's the scene. And here we want to ask you again to name the ethical concerns that you would want to consider here before you have your next conversation with Maria. And how would you address the concerns that you're aware of? So that is what we want you to consider, and we'll send you into breakout rooms for approximately 10 minutes. And then we'll see you back here.
Okay, I'm going to open the rooms right now, okay?
Great, thank you.
We're going to save some time to come to a Q&A. Jean has been curating some of the questions, but we would love to hear through the chat this time, what were some of the warning flags, the ethical considerations that you talked about in your group? And if you want, share how you chose to, how you would have addressed it with Maria, with the client.
Yeah, so we'll look for that in the chat. And then as you do that, what we'll be seeing any themes that are showing up, and then we'll also in a few minutes begin to look at the Q&A and start responding to some of the questions that are there. If you have any questions that came up in your conversations, feel free to post those in the Q&A also, and we'll have probably about 15 minutes to go through that.
Yeah, great. Many of you are highlighting conflict of interest through compensation.
Confidentiality. Yeah, and confidentiality as well is another one. Everything about it was a red flag.
Yeah. And this might be a consulting need, not a coaching need. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm just continuing to read the chat.
Yeah, Linda would run. I love that. It's, you know, it really does present a whole bunch of challenges. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's a question, is it meant to be team coaching, right? So that's something that comes up in the inquiry around this and peeling back, maybe that's the case, right? That might be an action to take if you're trained in team coaching, to propose that and to redesign the arrangement and engagement.
Yeah. And Meryl, I see your hand is up. Go ahead, you can unmute and
Thank you, Hope.
yeah.
And thanks, everybody. And I have to laugh because this scenario is it looks like it was written for me. I'm always presented with these kinds of things,
Well,
but why? Because we've had this great experience and trust has been so strong with the individual. So they think suddenly you can walk on water and that coaching is a miracle like pill, and everybody takes it and everybody succeeds, So first I like to acknowledge that trust bond that our client has presented with us, and then say, like within the scope of what we've done, what is it that you're trying to sort of like get into the water cooler system? And let's see how we could create something. But I can't be compensated for increase in performance. And I'm not in the business of judging my coaching clients. So you can't use me to come in. If you were to hire me in a different capacity, that would be a different story, but it would not be about assessing the people I just coached. I can't do that ever. But thank you. I mean, I see that you think I'm the soul of discretion, so I'd be perfect at doing this. But in other words, play to that point, acknowledge it in a positive way, and then say, the code of ethics protects you, your company, and me from stepping in doo-doo, basically.
Yeah. So naming that, again, so important to just say what is here right now, and then honoring where your client is coming from, so you can, really meet them. There's like a sense of respect that you're offering as well, and saying no at the same time. It's a really powerful way to respond.
The other thing I love about what you're sharing, Meryl, and it's funny that the client's name was Maria, so close to yours, but that you use it as an opportunity to educate your client, the public, community, society, about what coaching is and what coaching isn't, right? Because they don't know, they just have experienced this magical thing with you. And so it is an opportunity as a way of holding ethics, making that clear distinction.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, we'd love to go into a bigger discussion here. We're going to encourage you to just continue this conversation with your colleagues. And we want to shift gears to just answer some of the questions that have been showing up in the Q&A.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
And I also want to say we're going right to the top of the hour. And Hope and Kristen will let us know if they're able to stay beyond that, and understand this will be recorded. So we'll let you know how we're doing when we get to the top of the hour. So questions here. One question around ethics, that I'm so grateful that coaching has ethics, and these are stipulated by ICF. What is keeping coaching as a profession from requiring licensing? It seems licensing would further legitimize, and it goes on to talk about that, and just a quick touch on this, Hope and Kristen.
Wow, it's a great question. It feels a little bit out of the. It's not so much about ethics there as it is about how the profession wants to move forward, and I really don't know the answer to that, honestly.
Out of our scope to answer. All that I know from a licensed previous profession is like that really is related, like it's a much bigger governing body that comes into play and institutionalized. I was in optometry, healthcare, you needed to have a license and specific education, and we can't answer why that is or why it's not in our profession yet.
Yeah, I think the other piece there is that it then raises a whole lot of questions globally about how different countries and different legal systems would manage something like that. So it's a great question, but I think that I would point to the ICF to look at that question in more depth rather than here.
Right. And Hope and Kristen, we can do that. We'll be providing those links to the ICF website to further clarify some of that. And yet,
I'll just put that in here too. So those are, Yeah,
Yeah.
those are some resources in the chat
Excellent.
for
Thank you.
ICF. Yeah.
Okay, so we did touch on identity a little bit. So in terms of coaching, an ethical issue that hasn't been addressed necessarily so far is the training around identity. The person who's posing the question is that they're running into different thoughts about this and how many coaches would rather opt out than coach someone of a different identity. For instance, gender, race, sexual orientation, religion, or politics. How should coaches be trained to address identity?
Yeah, I'm going to pop in the chat, just a resource. I'm going to find it, but it is Sakari Connects. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Amber Mays, and I have to find Sakari's full correct name. They taught at the ACTO conference a couple years ago, and they've got something called the fifth domain that brings identity training specifically into coaching. Yeah.
It's Sakari Pinnock.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Sakari Pinnock. I could put her name in the chat, and we probably can get you her info, contact info.
Yeah.
And if
I think she has a double name.
Yeah, this is Karen. They also teach a program at the Georgetown University Institute for Transformational Leadership on identity and inclusion, and Sakari is a lead on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. I think
Can
it's
I jump
Phoenix
in on
Host,
this?
but
May I make a
yes.
comment, please?
Yep.
The whole, as Jean knows, my whole world revolves around identity issues, both personal and organizational.
Okay.
And just I'll be very brief here. In listening to all of this, there are so many assumptions about the nature of identity that you have to start by defining what you mean by identity. And in my work, in my experience, in my writing, to me, identity is utterly individual, and it has to do with how you create distinctive value in the world. Who are you? What makes you different? You know, what do you bring into this world? And it does not involve gender and race and all of the other, you know, views of what is the nature of identity today. I think those get in the way of the purer understanding of individual identity and the power it contains to help people build successful lives. That's my point of view. I've been doing it for 35 years and it's worked out pretty well. So you have to be very careful that you don't conflate identity with associations, affiliations, all of those things which we talk about, but be very, very careful on beginning by how do you define identity and what the implications are in that definition.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree.
One minute, please. I'm going to pop in just as holding the container. Thank you, Larry, for your perspective. And from a social justice systems of oppression standpoint, difference in identity is important too. And that is something that the coaching industry and many different industries are being called to look at. How do we hold both of that, especially for those of us that do see the common humanity that are called to this profession? How do we also hold difference and see how difference is important in somebody's lived experience and their personal development in a world that holds different as different? So it's the both and of that. And that's what we're being called into. What does that look like? And there is a big question marks around it.
Yeah, and the point I was going to make was that, you know, in your case study, there's a line in there that is really key for the coach. And that line was, for me, they have the opportunity to apply for a new role, a dream job that would give them a new team, greater responsibility, and involve travel to Europe, Asia, and Middle East. Why do we not see that as an opportunity to help somebody realize their dreams and their full potential? Why do we let these other things kind of get in the way and stoke our assumptions or biases about why they can't do this? There are different strategies that people can use to achieve success regardless of the adversity that they might experience. Why not use this as an opportunity to explore those strategies? And then if they choose that this is just not worth it, or this is impossible for them to pursue, that's their decision.
Yeah. Manny, that's really, you're bringing up some really important points that I think relate to some of the other issues we've seen, like what does it mean to actually hold your client's agenda? This may be, that particular part of the scenario may be a place where we really want to be looking there. It's not my judgment of what will work for you. And there may be some legal or HR issues that we need to look at. There's company responsibility to consider, but that's not necessarily our job as the coach. It may be that that's just something that comes up in the conversation with the client. Like, how are you caring for yourself in this setting, going into a part of the world where you might not be welcomed warmly, or there may be other issues that you're going to be facing. How are you preparing for that? Like, those may be ways that we start to help them take that apart.
Yeah, and I will divulge that I was the head of HR for a major global company in Asia, okay, and had to deal with these types of issues all the time. And that company was Avon Products, 90% of which were the employees were female.
Yeah.
So we had women traversing all over Asia without any issues or problems because we had strategies in which to make that happen.
And Manny, I want to thank you again for your perspective. And also, this is your experience and this is what has worked for you, which may not work for everyone in all cultural contexts. So this is where things get really gray and where we really need to be looking at what are the assumptions I'm making, either for, what might seem positive in one direction or not, what am I not seeing? And this is also where identity training, the question about that does become really important and becomes very individual for what somebody needs, given the people that they're working with and who they want to work with. And that this area of personal identity and awareness, we are getting more awareness around that as human beings in whatever context we're in, and how does that inform how we best show up ethically for the person in front of us in any given moment.
Yeah, that's great.
And so we can share more resources related to identity. Most of my training has come outside of the coaching industry because there just hasn't been a lot within the coaching industry and coaching context up until more recently.
Yeah, absolutely. But we'd be happy to share more resources with you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Neil, I see your hand is up.
Yeah.
Just unmute.
I'm
trying.
trying.
Okay, gotcha.
I would just like to suggest that while identity, individual specific identity, and it can be a very important step along the way for many individuals. I would like for us not to lose sight of the fact that there is a higher sense of identity that's kind of hidden in things like when we say every client is creative, resourceful, and whole. We're seeing a spiritual depth to every individual that is there as an identity that we all share and participate in. And for those of us that see a oneness in the world, that we're all connected and have a kind of shared identity. And I find that clients, if they're able to move beyond, move to that deeper sense of identity, it bypasses the smaller identities that we sometimes need to work with along the way, but are not really as real as our universal identity.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing your perspective on that, Neil. And I know there's so many different ways that we hold that, because for some of us, identity is really significant in our lives and really, really important to acknowledge, even as we can go deeper and get to the heart. Because I believe too that at our hearts, we're all, we can all connect, but sometimes there's a lot we need to acknowledge on the way there.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that, at least for me, and the learning I've been doing has been really revealing itself to me over and over again.
Yeah. And what we don't want is the identity conversation and the beliefs to take over the Q&A. It is
Yeah.
a really important piece to become curious around in the personal development field, because we are individuals who have been raised within cultural, societal contexts. We all have different lived experiences.
Right.
And if we assume only a shared identity, we are going to be missing out on the differences that the person is experiencing in their life as they try to grow and become the biggest, highest version of themselves and live their dreams. We really have to learn how to hold both of those. So
Yeah,
we have like 3
absolutely.
minutes. Let's see
We
if there's another
do.
question.
We
Yeah.
do. And so for everyone on the call, for the chapters who require it, our closing code today is ethics.
There you go.
Ethics.
Okay.
ETHICS. So really, some of the questions here relate to resources and tools recommended to redesign the initial agreement to be more inclusive and robust. So we might include some of those in our resource page, certainly enhancing the understanding of what we've all talked about today. So thank you for that question.
Yeah. And, just to add, we will be sending out our slides as well. We'll share those with the team that put this program together, and they'll be sending that off to you.
Yes, and we do have
making
3
it available
minutes.
somehow. Yes.
And so yes to slides, yes to CCEUs, connect with your chapter on how that works for your individual chapter if you don't know. But I will say, Hope and Kristen, there are a number of questions here. I would say about 10 left. What if we stay for another 10 minutes? Would that be possible for the two of you?
Yep, I could do 10
Yeah, I
minutes.
could do that. Yeah.
Okay, great. So for the people on the call, feel free to stay with us for the next 10 minutes. We understand if you can't. Thank you for joining us, but no, it'll be recorded. So please hang with us if you'd like to hear some of the other questions, or if you posed one of the questions.
Yeah, and I would just also invite anybody who does need to leave, if you want to just put a couple of words in the chat about what you're taking away from the session today, just to ground that for yourselves and for all of us. That would be awesome.
Yeah, and thank you all for being here today.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Making this into the rich discussion it was.
And thank you for inviting us too. This has been, it's like great learning for us as well.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Oh, Hope and Kristen, it's been our pleasure to have you here. And so, I'm curating a bunch of the questions together. Really, there are questions about wearing two hats, right? If you're coach and consultant, or the difference between brainstorming with a client and consulting. What would be a great resource to turn to really start to think, so that we're not making assumptions about conflict in these roles? What might we say to people who are asking questions in this area right now?
So, yeah, good place to look. I think I would probably say one place to go is back to your peers, like who may be doing both of those. Many coaches have come out of the consulting field and have figured out a way to work with both sets of skills. So that would be one way. And I think the other would be just to look into other resources, either from the place you got your coach training, or there may, I think going back to your colleagues or your local chapter would be a way to get more information. I don't know, Kristen, if you have anything to add there, but.
Yeah, one thing that I would just say is, Jean was sharing the questions with us when you were in the breakout room. I mentioned that some of these are great future topics for webinars and training for the community. So that's something that I would just invite you into. I think like anything, it's like, why clients come to us as coaches? Like if you can be in generative conversation about this, and you can really, look and constantly have yourself in awareness, looking at where are the opportunities to grow. This is always going to be a distinction for those of us. It seems like so many of us do provide dual roles for many of our coachees, and how do we continue to do that in a way that actually does serve our client, that holds them and empowers them as naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, and holds the integrity of the coaching profession so it doesn't get muddied and blurred, and that the public can really, we're still a new profession, right? The late 80s, early 90s. We're the public is like how we relate to this is really going to inform where our profession continues to go and what the public thinks of it too, and the opportunity that we have from a pure coaching standpoint. So,
Kristen and Hope, a question around before a session begins, that time when we're preparing for our session with a client, what thoughts or shared ideas about how to really settle in and consider ethics when we're approaching our coaching sessions and prepare for that?
Well, great question. I think, the first thing I think is prepare, like I would prepare as I do for any session, to just create a space where I am really grounded and available to my client, and really have a sense of where they are in their lives right now, what they're looking for, what's important to them. And to maybe just check in, if, with a lens on ethics, to check in to see, are there any areas where I might have a question in terms of my own ability to hold a really clear professional space. Because I think so much of what happens ethically comes up in the moment, that, you may not know at the moment what might show up, unless there's something that's already unfolding with your client. So I think I would really just more look at, is there anything where I feel like I'm not holding a really clear and clean space, and be tuned into that to make sure that I pay attention.
Yeah, so again, awareness.
Awareness.
Is what you're pointing to. In our training, we have a diagram, and I imagine in different training, there's something similar, where we reference a triangle, and it's like coach and client both contributing to an empowered relationship. And I really use this as a continued guide, as a check-in. Is the relationship, so it's really just a different way of saying what Hope is already saying, but is this relationship empowered right now? Or does something feel off? Am I disempowered? Is my client disempowered? What needs to be talked about in order to bring that empowerment back to the relationship? And that might be ethically related, or it may not be. It might be something else. But honestly, I think what it comes down to too, just in this moment as I talk out loud, is that if the relationship is disempowered in any way, there's likely some sort of ethical concern to be considering.
And to touch on agreements with client, clarifying who the client is, if we're working within organizations, that idea of, who gets to see assessment results, how are you handling that place of confidentiality, and being super clear with that with the contracting. So talk to us a little bit about that, identifying clients, sponsor, differentiating, and what would you say to people with that question today?
Yeah, I think, again, one of the things that we cover in our training is to design our relationship with the client up front. And if the client is being sponsored by an organization, or there's a manager or an organization involved, either in paying for the coaching or in recommending the coaching and setting it up, I would say, like, we would recommend that people have a three-way meeting to get really clear with the client, the person they're coaching, and with the sponsor, who has access to what information from the very beginning of the relationship, before the coaching even begins. Where are the lines of confidentiality? How, what, if any, information comes back to the sponsor? And generally, at least personally, I would say for most of it, that I would be willing to disclose when we meet, but that's it. If there's billing involved, but beyond that, it's up to the client that I'm coaching to disclose to the sponsor what they want to. So that's a line that that I hold and that has worked well. And other people may have other ideas, but that, again, it's an individual thing for the person you're coaching. But I think that feels like it holds the confidentiality and the safety of the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. The three-way contract. So the contract with the sponsor, the contract directly with the client, and being very clear about what the boundaries are around that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's the different dynamics. If it was, an internal coach, what needs to be discussed around that versus external coach too, and contracted. Yeah.
And comments here we're seeing is that this may be an education process for organizations we work with.
Yes,
coaching works and for where ethics comes in. And we certainly have that opportunity to share that learning and set that foundation.
Yeah, and I would say opportunity and responsibility, because again, in the newness of our profession, it feels like a lot of people have good intentions. And there still are a lot of people, especially within organizations, that don't really know what coaching is. And there's some things being used, being called coaching when it's not really coaching. And so we have that opportunity to educate, to create our future together.
Yeah.
Well, the last question we have here to round it off is the question of trauma and better understanding. Trauma is something that's coming forward, and our understanding as coaches around this is really important to be trauma sensitive. So what would you say to people who are learning about a trauma sensitive approach, what it might be, and a potential resource for them to reach to?
Yeah,
that's great. There's a few things. There are some great resources out there now for coaches, and we could probably give you a couple of things to read or to investigate some training as well. I think that, as coaches, we're not getting trained to work with trauma, but more to be trauma informed. And the way I think about it is to learn enough to be able to hold a lens to know, is that something that's impacting your client? And if so, what are some resources for them to work with that more fully? The other thing, there was a book about a year ago that came out that was called What Happened to You? And that's one that starts to at least raise the issue that trauma may be influencing people, because sometimes the client doesn't know that that's what's going on either. So just having that, again, it's a question of having awareness and using that as a lens to be able to point people to what they need to move forward. And Kristen, you have a little bit more background on that. I don't know.
Yeah. I just saw
anything else
Manal
you could-
post that she is starting trauma-informed training. And I, as I said, I've been coaching for 12 years, and over the last 4, 5, 6 years, I became more and more understanding of what trauma actually is, and then realized I needed my own support and training to really meet my clients to not only be trauma informed, but trauma trained, because I saw the more I learned, the more important I learned it was to have that education in addition to my coaching, especially in these times after we've gone through almost 3 years of a global pandemic. Trauma, it was a trauma creating experience for many people, but also a trauma triggering. So patterns of trauma and adaptive strategies that we have embedded that are really stuck. And it's different than therapy, but really being able to meet our client in an informed way so that we don't trigger trauma, and to really have those safe, open conversations has just become more and more important. And there is, I'm doing somatic experiencing, which is Peter Levine's work, which is a practice that they teach to teachers, to nurses, to like anyone who works with a human being. So it's really supportive, and it takes it out of the only therapeutic realm, but really to recognize it's really like a mental health first aid, which is important. But there are also, Coaches Rising has some great trainings that involve some trauma-informed teachers from different fields like mindfulness, and then bringing it to coaching. So again, we'll share some of the resources there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah, another great topic for a webinar and for learning more about it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I was thinking of the TRELEVEN, the trauma sensitive mindfulness practices for safe and transformative practice, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
11. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely lovely. Well, that rounds us off today with all these amazing questions. Thank you so much for your engagement.
Yeah, thank
Hope,
you.
Kristen, thank you so much for coming. A special thanks to Sharon Jacobson on our ICF Connecticut programs team for bringing and inviting Hope and Kristen into this. And a thank you again to all of the ICF chapters and directors of programming, my colleagues who from all the different chapters across the region that helped invite all of you here today. So thank you so much from ICF Connecticut, and we bid you a good day.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you
everyone
all.
for being
Yeah.
here.
It's been really great to be with you.